She tossed my ID into a sewer. Let that sink in. One moment I was standing in front of my brand new lakefront home, admiring the view and sipping coffee, and the next, I was being treated like a trespasser by a woman who thought she ruled the entire neighborhood. I had just moved into this so-called exclusive community after months of paperwork, planning, and finally securing one of the most beautiful homes on the lake. It was meant to be peaceful. But then, Karen happened. She wasn't just any resident, she was the president of the HOA, and not the friendly, community-loving type. No, she was the clipboard-holding, sunglasses-wearing, rule-spitting kind of president who enjoyed making everyone else's life miserable under the name of standards. And she came at me hard the moment she saw me. I was outside, in front of my driveway, wearing casual clothes, sipping my morning brew. That's when she spotted me. She came power-walking down the street like she was on a mission. Without even introducing herself, she started interrogating me. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I was stunned for a second but responded politely, "I just moved into the lakefront house, number 17. I even smiled, thinking she was just doing her job. But she wasn't there to help or welcome me. She was there to dominate. "I haven't seen any move-in notices. Are you a guest of someone? You need to register all guests with the HOA." I calmly reached into my wallet and pulled out my government-issued ID to show her I was the owner. It clearly had my name and address printed on it, matching the property. She didn't even take a moment to look at it properly. Instead, she snatched it from my hand and examined it like she was sniffing out a counterfeit. Her eyes narrowed. Anyone can fake this these days. We've had people pretending to live here before. You don't look like a homeowner. That last line hit differently. I wasn't dressed fancy, and I certainly didn't fit her picture-perfect mold of what a resident should look like. But that didn't mean she had the right to act like a self-appointed border patrol. Before I could say another word, she casually walked to the curb and, with a flick of her hand, dropped my ID right into the storm drain. I was stunned. Absolutely speechless. "Are you serious?" I shouted, running over. "You just threw away my government ID." She just tilted her head and said, "If you really live here, I'm sure you can prove it another way. We don't let strangers loiter around." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked down at the drain, saw my ID barely floating below the grate, probably already sliding into the dark pipes. That card wasn't just plastic, it was my identity, my address, my official link to everything. She didn't just violate my privacy, she destroyed my right to defend myself in that moment. When I turned back toward her, she was on her phone. "Yes, hello, I need officers sent immediately. There's a suspicious male outside one of the lake homes. He claims he lives here but has no proof of residence and refused to leave when asked." My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe what was happening. She was flipping the script like a pro. Now I was the intruder. Now she was the victim. She even put on a frightened tone, acting like she was in danger. "He seems aggressive," she added, even though I hadn't moved an inch toward her. I took a deep breath, trying not to lose it. Yelling at her would only make things worse. I backed up, pulled out my phone, and called my realtor, who had just helped me close on the house. She immediately emailed me a copy of my closing documents, property deed, and ownership transfer confirmation. At least I had something in hand when the cops showed up. Still, I couldn't shake the humiliation of it all. I had just moved here for peace and quiet, and now I was being treated like some criminal because I didn't fit her HOA fantasy. I had always heard stories about entitled people like her, but now I was living one. And worst of all, I knew it wouldn't end with just a cop visit. But what Karen didn't know, what she never even bothered to ask, was who I really was. She looked at me and made a snap judgment based on my clothes, my relaxed attitude, maybe even the color of my skin or the way I talked. But she never once asked what I did for a living or why I had chosen that house. Because if she had, she might have thought twice before dumping my identity into a sewer. You see, I wasn't just some random buyer. I was the newly appointed CEO of the Regional Lakefront Development Board. My company had a multi-year contract overseeing all zoning, real estate permits, and special access rights for the very same lake she was so proud of. The boat ramps, private docks, mansion developments. It all came through my office. And I wasn't just the CEO on paper. I had real decision-making authority. But I didn't flex it. Not yet. I wanted to see how far she'd take this. Because if someone could treat a total stranger with this much disrespect, they deserved to face the consequences of their actions, not because of revenge, but because of principle. So I stood there, waiting for the police to arrive, documents in hand, phone recording everything, knowing full well, this story was far from over. It was just getting started. The sound of approaching sirens didn't faze me, not because I wasn't nervous, but because I knew I had done nothing wrong. Still, there's something incredibly humiliating about standing in front of your own house, holding proof of ownership in your phone, while someone else accuses you of being a threat to the neighborhood. Karen stood a few feet away from me, still talking loudly into her phone as if she were starring in her own dramatic TV episode. "Yes, officers, he's still here," she said, glancing at me with smug satisfaction. "No ID, acting suspicious, possibly casing the area. I need someone here now." I could see the neighbors starting to peek out from behind their curtains. A few people even came onto their porches to watch the show. Great. Just what I needed on my second day here, becoming the neighborhood spectacle. Minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled up. The officers stepped out, calm but alert, as if they'd been briefed to expect a confrontation. One of them, Officer Darnell, approached me. The other, Officer Simmons, went to speak with Karen. I could see her gesturing wildly in my direction, acting out some imaginary scene of aggression. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move toward her. I just stood calmly and pulled up the email from my realtor with the ownership documents, the signed purchase contract, and the digital deed with the county stamp. I handed my phone to Officer Darnell and explained everything. I just moved into that house 2 days ago. I was standing outside when she walked up and demanded to see ID. I showed her. She grabbed it and threw it in the storm drain. He raised an eyebrow. "She threw your ID into a sewer?" I nodded. "Yes, sir." "Without warning." "Then she called you and said I didn't belong." Officer Simmons, meanwhile, looked over at Karen with a skeptical expression. She was still talking, loudly. Saying things like, "He got defensive," and "he refused to comply," even though there had been no confrontation at all. She kept referencing HOA rules, as if they somehow overruled state law. Officer Simmons finally raised a hand and said, "Ma'am, just to be clear, did you take his ID and throw it into the sewer?" Karen paused, suddenly realizing how that sounded out loud. "I didn't take it. He handed it to me, and I discarded it because it looked suspicious." Officer Simmons blinked. "That's destruction of personal property. And possibly interference with identification. That's not a decision you were allowed to make." Karen quickly tried to backtrack. "Well, I mean, I didn't know he actually lived here. I thought I was protecting the community." Officer Darnell handed me back my phone and said, "Your paperwork checks out. This is your home. We appreciate your cooperation. I'm going to go speak to her now." I thanked him and stepped aside as the 2 officers pulled Karen further away and began questioning her more firmly. From a distance, I could see her demeanor change. Her arms were no longer crossed in defiance. She looked nervous. She had clearly thought the cops would instantly side with her. After all, she was the HOA president and the self-appointed protector of the neighborhood. But instead of praise, she was now facing the consequences of her impulsive actions. I stood there, watching her carefully crafted reputation start to crumble. But I didn't gloat. I didn't yell or argue. I knew something she didn't know, something she was about to learn the hard way. After a few more minutes, Officer Darnell returned. "Sir, we're going to let this go without arrest for now. But I've advised her that if you decide to press charges for the destruction of your ID or false reporting, you have the legal right to do so." I nodded. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your professionalism." The officers left soon after, and Karen stood alone on the sidewalk, looking smaller than before. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look at me. She just turned and stormed off, her pride clearly bruised. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Later that afternoon, I decided to drive down to the Lakefront HOA office to check on something I had been delaying. Before I moved in, I had heard about a massive development project in the neighborhood, an extravagant $3 billion mansion being planned along the water. What most people didn't know was that I, through a merger my firm completed just weeks earlier, had final sign-off authority on all building and zoning permits for lakefront properties in the area. Not only that, but our office controlled the architectural review process, dock access points, environmental compliance reports, every piece of red tape you needed to navigate before a single stone was laid. And that mansion? The one Karen had been raving about in HOA newsletters, calling it the crowning jewel of the neighborhood? Yeah, that was her project. She was the silent financial partner, the one who had secured private investors and signed off on the design. She stood to gain millions if the project went through. That's why she was so obsessed with the neighborhood staying pure and controlled. It wasn't about community pride, it was about profit. So I checked the files. And sure enough, her name was all over the permit application. She had applied for fast-track processing and had even scheduled a groundbreaking ceremony for next month. One phone call from me could put it all on hold. One signature, or lack of one, could stall the entire thing indefinitely. I thought about it long and hard. I wasn't the revenge type. I had no desire to punish people just because they were unpleasant. But this was different. Karen hadn't just been rude. She had tried to use her position to humiliate me, falsely accuse me, and strip away my dignity, all while protecting her secret financial interests. That wasn't just unfair. That was dangerous. And in my book, actions had consequences. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream or argue. I wasn't going to go online and post rants. I was simply going to do my job, and that job included reviewing her permits. And as of that day, her $3 billion mansion project was marked with one red stamp, under review. No approval. No green light. Just silence. And silence, in the world of high-stakes real estate, is louder than any protest. It means delays. It means money lost. It means powerful people start asking questions, and Karen would have to answer every single one of them. It had only been 3 days since the ID incident, and already Karen's name was beginning to echo through our office halls, but not for reasons she'd like. Contractors were calling non-stop. Architects wanted answers. One of the engineers even showed up in person, asking why the mansion project, which had been set to break ground in less than 30 days, had been abruptly paused with no explanation. I didn't dodge the conversations. I simply told them the truth. The project was under review, pending compliance approvals and further inspection from the executive team. And I was that executive team. What no one outside of the boardroom fully understood was that my firm wasn't just another zoning authority, it was the main decision-maker for the entire Lake District's development. Through years of acquisitions and partnerships, we had consolidated land rights, water access, and shoreline development across the 3 major communities surrounding the lake. And because Karen's mansion touched all 3 jurisdictions, her project depended entirely on my signature. But I didn't sign. I waited. Every day, her investors grew more impatient. They had poured millions into this ambitious build based on Karen's assurances that permits were locked in. But now their calls weren't getting returned. Their trust in her was unraveling. By the end of the week, Karen herself tried to get clever. She sent a polished email to our office, professionally written, pretending she was simply following up on timeline progress and looking forward to collaborative success. I read it and smiled. It was a complete shift from her real-life attitude, like she had suddenly discovered humility when dollars were on the line. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I flagged her email and forwarded it to our legal compliance team with a note: "Please flag this project for full environmental and neighborhood impact review." That review? It would take a minimum of 60 days. With that single internal request, I had pushed her entire mansion development into a bureaucratic limbo. And there was nothing she could do about it. She had tried to strip away my humanity on the sidewalk that day, using power and position to crush what she thought was a powerless man. But now, she was realizing something crucial: her version of power was shallow, mine was institutional. And it was built to last. But still, I wasn't doing this just for revenge. I was doing it because I had started looking deeper into how she'd been running the HOA. And what I found? It was worse than I expected. Karen had been exploiting her HOA title for personal gain for years. She controlled lake access permissions, prioritized certain home upgrades while denying others, and quietly ensured her own properties were granted waivers while enforcing strict code rules on her neighbors. There were complaints, lots of them. But they'd been buried in paperwork, silenced in meetings, or dismissed as disgruntled homeowner bias. I knew I couldn't sit back any longer. This wasn't just about a thrown ID anymore. It was about how one entitled person was manipulating an entire community. So I did what I do best: I followed the trail. I requested an audit of HOA spending from the past 5 years. I flagged several unusually large transactions, including a $47,000 community beautification charge that had no record of delivery. Another payment of $68,000 was listed as dock improvement, but no dock had been touched in over a year. Then came the final nail: a $12,000 consulting fee paid directly to a firm registered under Karen's brother's name, despite HOA rules strictly prohibiting any business dealings with family members. It was clear she was using the HOA's funds as her personal ATM. That gave me everything I needed. I set up a private meeting with 2 longtime residents on the HOA board who I'd heard were growing frustrated with Karen's leadership. I presented the documents, calmly, professionally, with dates, receipts, and comparison records. They were stunned. One of them, a retired judge, looked me in the eye and said, "This is enough to remove her permanently." And that was when the wheels started turning. The board members called an emergency HOA meeting, open to all residents, to address recent administrative irregularities. Flyers were posted. Notices sent. Karen tried to cancel it, claiming procedural violations, but by that point, it was out of her hands. That evening, the clubhouse was packed. Neighbors who rarely showed up to meetings came out in full force. You could feel the tension in the air. Karen arrived last, still holding her clipboard, but her swagger was gone. She wore a forced smile, but her eyes darted around the room nervously. The board opened the meeting, and after a few routine announcements, they handed the floor to me. I didn't yell. I didn't insult her. I just showed the facts. Slide by slide, document by document, I revealed how funds had been misused, how rules had been broken, and how favoritism had corrupted the very purpose of the HOA. People gasped. Some murmured in anger. One older resident stood up and said, "We trusted you, Karen. And you used that trust to enrich yourself." Karen tried to speak, but every word she said only dug her deeper. She stammered, blamed clerical mistakes, and even tried to shift blame onto former board members who weren't even in the room. No one was buying it. When the vote came, it was unanimous. She was stripped of her HOA title effective immediately, pending a full investigation and possible legal proceedings. But the damage to her reputation was already done. As she walked out of the clubhouse that night, head down, no one clapped. No one stopped her. Even her closest allies stayed seated, unwilling to follow her anymore. The queen of the lakefront had been dethroned. Meanwhile, I walked home quietly. No victory dance, no celebration. Just peace. The kind I came here looking for in the first place. I didn't destroy Karen. She did that all by herself. All I did was hold up a mirror, and let the truth do the rest. After that night, everything in the neighborhood changed. Word about the HOA meeting spread like wildfire, not just inside our community but across nearby developments too. Karen had spent years building an illusion of power, and it came crumbling down in one evening. But while the residents talked, whispered, and shared every juicy detail, I remained quiet. I wasn't here to celebrate someone else's downfall. I had only done what was necessary to protect my dignity and, more importantly, the community from someone who thought leadership was about control, not service. But karma has a funny way of working. Once the mask falls off, everything else starts unraveling. Within a week, the remaining investors behind her $3 billion mansion project started pulling out. They hadn't even known she was under investigation. As soon as they found out, they froze all financial activity. Banks withdrew preliminary funding. The engineering firms canceled scheduled visits. Contractors asked to be removed from future obligations due to reputational risk. In the world of big money, nothing scares people more than bad press and pending lawsuits. Karen tried to salvage what she could. She made frantic calls to everyone she knew in the local government, pleaded with real estate contacts, even sent a letter to the city council trying to paint herself as the victim of a coordinated smear campaign. But no one bought it. Too much damage had been done, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. It wasn't just the ID incident anymore. It was the financial misconduct, the broken promises, and the way she had treated people for years. Her silence in the aftermath said everything. She had nothing left to say because she knew there was no excuse strong enough to erase the truth. Then came the news that shocked everyone. Karen had listed her lakefront home for sale. The very property she once flaunted as a symbol of her power was now being quietly advertised online under a private broker listing. She didn't want the neighbors to see the open house signs, didn't want to admit she was leaving. But people noticed. And the rumors began again. She's skipping town. She's being sued. She's going bankrupt. I didn't pay attention to any of it. I didn't need to. The facts spoke louder than the gossip ever could. What mattered to me was that the neighborhood finally had a chance to breathe again. People came up to me during morning walks and thanked me, not just for standing up to Karen, but for doing it with patience and proof. One older couple even said, "We've been afraid of her for years. You gave the rest of us the courage to speak up." I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good to hear those things. But more than pride, I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that I hadn't stooped to her level. She had tried to crush me with arrogance and lies. I responded with truth, process, and calm. That's a different kind of power, the kind that builds, not breaks. A few weeks later, the HOA board invited me to join as a consultant, given my background in development and law. I accepted, not because I wanted authority, but because I wanted to make sure no one like Karen could ever control things again. We updated the bylaws, enforced real transparency in spending, and created a formal complaint process with guaranteed follow-up. And the best part? The community responded. More people showed up at meetings. More volunteers signed up for events. The neighborhood slowly started feeling like what it was meant to be, a peaceful, respectful place to live. Then something unexpected happened. A family from out of state came to view Karen's house, the one she had listed quietly. I happened to be outside when they pulled up in a moving truck. A young couple, maybe in their early 30s, with 2 kids and a golden retriever that leapt out of the car like it had found heaven. The husband walked up to me and smiled. "Hi, we're looking at this place. Realtor says it's lakefront and the community has great schools." I nodded and said, "It is. And it just got a whole lot better." He laughed, asked a few questions, and we talked for 10 minutes like old friends. He didn't know anything about the Karen drama, and I didn't mention it. Why would I? The house wasn't defined by its past owner. It was about to start a new chapter with people who deserved it. As I walked back toward my house that evening, I looked across the lake. The water was still. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. It hit me how close I had come to losing this piece. If I had exploded when Karen tossed my ID, if I had fought her in anger, if I had tried to go viral or post every moment online, it might have spiraled into chaos. But sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all, just the patience to let the truth catch up. And catch up it did. Later that night, I received a letter in my mailbox. No name on the envelope, just a plain white slip of paper folded neatly. I opened it, and inside were just 5 words: "I was wrong. I'm sorry." I knew the handwriting. It was Karen's. It wasn't much. It didn't erase what she did. But it was something. A small sign that even the proudest walls can crack, given enough time. I folded the note and placed it in a drawer, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. That power isn't about controlling people. It's about how you treat them when no one's watching. Karen had learned that the hard way. And I finally had what I came here for. Peace. Not just on the outside, but within.